What is up, everybody? Back here again with the part 2 to my Justin Martyr second apology walkthrough. Here we're going to be taking a look at chapters really 10 through the conclusion of the dialogue, chapter 15, and we're going to be dwelling on a lot of this really important philosophical content that's in it. So I'm going to make the executive decision to kind of skip over chapter 9. The basic idea, again, you can go and read it on your own. The basic idea, though, is that Justin is going to argue. He's going to take a sidetrack here in the dialogue, and he's going to argue that the threat of eternal punishment is not just a facade. It is a real thing, and for the Christian, it's very important. Again, you can go and read that on your own, but what I want to do is I want to start here with chapter 10, because this chapter, I mean, it is crazy. The title, just to let you know, is Christ Compared with Socrates. Like, what? What is going on here? Justin is comparing Christ and Socrates? Let's get into the text and break this down. Again, notes are going to be linked in the video description below. So, first, he starts off with this bold claim, and he's going to say, our doctrines, then, appear to be greater than all human teaching, because Christ, who appeared for our sakes, became the whole rational being, both body, reason, and soul. Body, reason, and soul. This is crazy. Let's read this again. Our doctrines, the Christian philosophical doctrines, appear to be greater than all human teaching. Why? Because Christ, who appeared for our sakes, became the whole rational being, both body and reason and soul. For whatever either lawgivers or philosophers uttered well, they elaborated by finding and contemplating some part of the logos, the word. But since they did not know the whole of the word, which is Christ, they often contradicted themselves. I mean, this should be shocking to you. Justin here is making the claim that the Christian philosophical position, the Christian theology, Christian philosophy, is greater than all human teaching. Revelation here. So both the Christian philosophical tradition and the Christian revelation is greater than all human teaching because Christ is the embodiment of reason itself. Christ literally is the entire rational part of mankind, but also the revelatory part. He is reason and revelation embodied in a single unified figure. This should be mind-blowing. It's utterly striking, and I frankly don't know what to do with it right now. I can't really come to grips with the forcefulness of both this statement and this idea. And so I want you to really dwell on this. I mean, it should blow your mind. It really should. But let's bracket that for now, and let's get into the rest of the dialogue. So, again, he's going to say that there's a parallel between Socrates and the Christians. So, Socrates was persecuted, famously, and the Christians are persecuted, and they're persecuted on similar grounds. So let's take a look here in the text. He goes on to say, and Socrates, who was more zealous in this direction than all of them, meaning the other previous philosophers, was accused of the very same crimes as ourselves, as us Christians. For they said that he, Socrates, was introducing new divinities and did not consider those to be gods whom the state recognized. So Socrates was an atheist, just like early Christians were called. They were called atheists because they denied the state polytheism. You see this in Acts 17 as well, with Paul introducing this new divinity, the monument to the unknown God. And that's going to be what Socrates did. That's going to be what the Christians were doing. That's what Paul was doing. They were introducing this new ultimate divinity, superior to all of the polytheistic ones. This divinity that's not even the same qualitatively as the polytheistic gods. It's a different, an utterly radical thing in itself, and that thing is, again, what we call God, referencing back to the first video when I talked about the label that we apply to God, meaning for Justin, the label that we apply to this most fundamental, the label that we apply to this that we not know what. For Anselm, that than which nothing greater can be conceived. Okay, that's what's going on here, and there's this parallel between the Christians and Socrates. So then he's going to go on and he's going to say that, again, draw some more parallels with Socrates kicking out Homer not literally, but kicking out Homer's influence, and the Christians doing a very similar thing by kicking out all of these other traditions, or attempting to do so in these first couple decades and centuries of Christianity. But unfortunately, that's where a lot of the parallels end, and Justin's going to point out that even though Socrates saw through a glass darkly this glimpse into the eternal word and the eternal truth, people weren't willing to die for him, and he was not the firstborn of the ineffable creator as Christ was. So that's going to where he's going to kind of conclude this chapter by pointing out a few of the differences, saying that not only for Christ did philosophers and scholars believe, but also artisans and people entirely uneducated, despising both glory and fear and death. While Socrates was just an instrument of mere human reason, Christ, the embodiment of both reason and revelation in a single figure, transcends that bound. And that's going to be the key difference in this paragraph here. So let's move on here to chapter 11, where Justin is going to talk about how Christians view death. And let me pull up my notes real quick, switching forth between the notes and the dialogue. So Justin's going to make a longer argument here to defend the Christians against claims that they are inconsistent in their views on death. And this is, again, going back to the first video in this series, this is a common theme, a common theme that's going on with the Romans at the time. The Romans are accusing Christians that they're inconsistent in their view on death. They want to say that the afterlife, where we see God in this eternal paradise, is in fact what matters most. Well, then why aren't they willing to go there right now? And Justin's going to defend this claim again. He famously defended it earlier in the text, and he's going to defend it again now. He's going to say that we as Christians give thanks when we pay the debt of death, which is due to every man. And I want you to think about this, because this is actually a direct quote from him. He says we give thanks when we pay this debt of death. And just imagine Justin going to his execution with supreme confidence in his philosophical reasoning and in the revelation that he has encountered. And he's going there not worried. And there's actually an interesting parallel between Socrates and Justin here, because they're both going to their deaths knowing that they're going home. In the Crito, Socrates famously quotes Homer and references Achilles. And Socrates says that he has this dream where a lady in white came to him and said that essentially when he's executed, he's finally going to be home. And that's going to be, I honestly think, this is speculation, but Justin may have been thinking about that if he had access to the Crito, which is not, that's not, he very well could have. He could very well be thinking about Socrates' own account of his execution while he is going on to give thanks. And he is going on knowing that he's going to join the Father, and he's going to see Socrates and Plato and these other people. So that's just his point of view here. And in this paragraph, chapter 11, he's also going to talk about a story of virtue and vice. And this is actually an interesting story. So vice, according to Justin here, promises Hercules that by following her, Hercules will pass through life with the greatest of pleasures and beauties. Yet virtue promises none of that, and virtue is this kind of decrepit figure. But virtue promises everlasting glory. And for Justin, this allegory, this short story, is going to be crucial, because he and his followers are going to be pursuing virtue. They're going to be forsaking the pleasures of vice. And especially contrast this, situate this story in the context with which Justin is writing, and to see how radical it is. The Romans that he's writing to are disgustingly vicious in their sacrificial practices, in their lewd hobbies, and Justin here is directly calling them out. I think that's what makes this allegory so radical. He's directly calling out the Romans and saying, look, you pursue the greatest pleasures, the most beautiful pleasures of this life, but we pursue the everlasting glory of virtue. And this is a key part of an idea that's going to, again, be transformed and adapted into the Christian tradition, where your virtues are developed in this world, and you take them and you keep them and you continue to develop them in the afterlife. And I say here that there's a fascinating insight contained in this section, because Justin says that vice imitates virtue closely, but vice fails to be fully virtuous. And because vice imitates virtue, these imitations lead earthly-minded men astray and captivate them to the point where they confuse virtue and vice and attach evil properties to virtue. This should give you some serious pause. So what Justin's saying here is that actually vice can appear to be virtuous, and those who are attracted to such vices will then start to mistake virtue for being evil. I'm not going to draw any examples out here, but I want you to think about, and I could, but I'm going to leave that to you. I want you to think about some examples of this perhaps going on today. Maybe in the political climate, maybe in your peer groups, maybe in, who knows, maybe even in your religious communities. Think about this really closely and see if you can spot any examples in your own life. So let's continue to move on here. He's going to end this section with this idea that Christians have a contempt of death, meaning that they think it is beneath them, even when it can be escaped. And so this is going to play a key role in both the Christian tradition and in especially in Justin's works here. He and other Christians have this disgust for death because it's essentially beneath them. And again, this is a Platonic idea. This stems directly from the Credo and the Phaedo. And you can see Justin taking those ideas and co-opting them into his Christian tradition and combining them with the sheer force of revelation, with the sheer force of Christ being the victor over death, and with Christ saving us all from the tribulations of death. There's a very strong passage in, I think it's 1 Corinthians, or it's in one of the Corinthians, where death is the final thing that needs to be conquered. And for Justin, that's exactly what's going on right here in this dialogue. He probably was thinking about that verse when he was writing this. So let's go on to chapter 12 here, because that's where Justin gives a nice argument for why he thinks Christians are not afraid of death. So going back to the text, Justin is going to say, so chapter 12, to situate it a little bit, is going to be Justin defending Christians, again, against these charges of the Roman Senate. That's the whole dialogue. The whole dialogue, the point of it, is to defend Christians against bogus charges and hypocritical charges from the Roman Senate. And so in chapter 12, the Romans are bringing against the Christians these charges. He says here, and heard the Christians slandered and saw them fearless of death. And then he goes on later in the dialogue to talk more about it. What he's gonna do here is he's gonna argue that Christians are proved innocent by their contempt of death. Proved innocent of what? They're proved innocent of the charges that the Romans are making. So charges like human sacrifice, engaging in bodily pleasures, all these things that the Romans are making up. Justin's saying, no, this is actually not true. Here's one argument why this is not true. And he's going to argue as such. Those who fear death do so because they are attached to worldly goods and do not want to lose them. Christians are not attached to such goods and don't even care about them. Therefore, Christians don't have a reason to fear death. And so what this argument does is it shows that the Christians, one, they're not going to be attached to this is what Justin's observed. They're not attached to worldly goods, and if they're not attached to worldly goods, they don't care about losing them. And so then Christians are not attached to such goods and don't even care about them. This is a modus ponens argument. Therefore, Christians have no reason to fear death. And we could even formulate this in a little bit different way. So the conclusion here was that Christians don't have a reason to fear death. We could formulate it a different way and talk about how Christians are not attracted to worldly goods, and then conclude from that they can't be guilty of these charges of indulging in worldly goods like human sacrifice, like lewd behavior, like impious behavior that the Romans are accusing them of. So really there's two arguments here. I just mentioned that first one. But Justin's going to go on here to mention that there's this utter hypocrisy of the people who charge the Christians with crimes. So again, the Romans are charging the Christians with these heinous crimes that they didn't commit, yet the Romans themselves are engaging in those crimes. They're engaging in these sacrifices, in these sexual misadventures. And Justin's saying, look, not only are those BS, but the Christians can't be committing those because they are not attached to worldly goods like you all are. So he's really calling out the Romans for their behavior as well. He's calling them out and saying, look, you all are committing these same heinous acts. You are hypocritical and you are liars. And I bet this enraged them, frankly. But the point here, this section, is that the very act of the Christians in the face of death should be sufficient to prove their innocence. They have no need for earthly desires. Again, as evidenced by their contempt of death. They don't fear death. They think it's beneath them. Why don't they fear death? Because they have nothing to lose and everything to gain. And therefore we conclude that they don't really care about these earthly desires. Justin uses this to pose a dilemma to the Romans as well. Kill us and we shall win. Don't kill us and we shall also win. But in each of your choices, we do not commit the crimes that you hold us accountable for. That's my reading of this text here. Justin saying, look, you kill us? Okay, cool. You don't kill us? We're going to go on and continue to take glory and to take glory in the created order and to teach our brethren about these doctrines. So in any case, look, you're liars. In any case, you are hypocrites. And in any case, we will win. I think that's the kind of esoteric reading of this section here. So let's take a look now at chapter 13. And he's going to come back to this theme of how the word, the logos, has been in all men. So here in chapter 13, Justin says that, this is a direct quote, whatever things were rightly said among all men are the property of us Christians. Now this is a stunning statement coming from this educated philosopher. Let me go back to the text here and read a little bit more, and then we can come back to that. So he's going to say, for I myself, when I discovered the wicked disguise which the evil spirits had thrown around the divine doctrines of the Christians, to turn aside others from joining them, laughed both at those who frame these falsehoods and the disguise itself, and at the popular opinion, and I confess that I both boast and with all my strength strive to be found a Christian, not because the teachings of Plato are different from those of Christ, but because they are not in all respects similar. And then he goes on to talk about the poets and stuff. For each man spoke well in proportion to the share he had of the logos, of the word, seeing what was related to it. So here in this beginning of the section, he's talking about how he first discovered, he was a convert to Christianity, and he first discovered that there was a lot of misrepresentation of Christian teaching going on. But then when he finally found the true Christian teaching and interpreted it through the Platonic ideas, the Platonic tradition, he says here, he laughed at those who frame these falsehoods, like Crescus, as he mentioned in chapter 3, I think, and at the disguise itself and of the popular opinion of Christians. And now, he says, he confesses that he boasts with all of his strength to be found a Christian, not because of the teachings of Plato are different, but because they are not in all respects similar. What's going on there? He's saying that, look, the Christian teachings are not at all radically different than a lot of these other philosophers, but they just go beyond it. They are more powerful in their explanatory scope. They are more beautiful in their explanatory depth. And so he's really, as a convert, he is saying that he takes pride, he boasts in his philosophical position. And a little bit of context for you, back then, before Justin came on the scene, really in the early decades of Christianity, Christianity was seen as a superstitious, cultish-like thing. And Justin donned the philosopher's cloak. He literally put on the philosopher's garbs and argued that Christianity is an extremely powerful philosophical worldview. And so I mentioned in one of my previous videos on my interest in ancient Christian philosophy that I think it's quite fascinating to see that these highly educated men and scholars are starting to convert to Christianity not because of some internal conversion of the heart, but because of the intellectual power of the Christian tradition and the intellectual power of the scriptures, again, interpreted through the philosophical tools of their day. So he's going to go on here to say that again, the Christians they have revelation on their side, so they're going to go beyond the philosophers, the earthly philosophers. But he says, like I mentioned, whatever things were rightly said among all men, they are the property of us Christians. For next to God, we worship and love the Word, Jesus, who is the unbegotten and ineffable, who is from the unbegotten and ineffable God, since also he became man for our sakes, that becoming in a partaker of our sufferings, he might also bring us healing. For all the writers, all the previous philosophers, were able to see the realities darkly through the sowing of the implanted word that was in them. For the seed and imitation impacted according to capacity is one thing, and quite another is the thing itself, of which there is participation and imitation according to the grace which is from him. What's going on here? He's mentioning here again that early philosophers were able to see the truths of Christian doctrine through their own philosophical systems. But he's going to say that our participation and imitation of the divine nature is radically different because it is directly through the Logos. It is directly through the Logos embodied in this person of Jesus. Okay, so the very Logos, Jesus himself, is quite different than the seed of it planted in all men, which is going to be natural reason. So this is a chapter 13 here is very, very striking, and I think it's worth dwelling on for a long time. Again, this second half of the dialogue is quite radical. So let's move on here to finish up. Now Justin's going to say in chapter 14, this is going to be basically a prayer that his appeal be published, and he's going to say he wants this appeal to be published so that men can see their own errors, even though they have chosen to commit these errors. And he's going to state that it is in our nature, again, a reference to this natural law, it is in our nature to know good and evil. Again, another reference to this natural law here. But interestingly, he's going to note that those who condemn us end up condemning themselves. So again, this in his context is going to be the Romans. And this could be a reference to, one, the divine wrath that will be poured out on them for their crimes, their hypocrisy, their persecution of Christians under bogus charges. Or, and I think this is really what Justin has in mind, it could be their failure to perceive the truth. That's how they condemn themselves. They fail to perceive this philosophical and revelatory insight, and in the end results in their eternal damnation. So again, I think that's what Justin has in mind in chapter 14. He is saying, look, I'm going to argue for the truth of the Christian doctrine through philosophy and through revelation. And if you don't see that, that's on you, buddy. And that's going to be your fault in the end. And you're going to pay the price, not only with suffering, but with just a failure to perceive the truth. And again, but this is going to be developed a little bit more in the Christian tradition, to where truth plays a big role in the Thomists and in the scholastic period. Truth is going to play a very, very key role. And if you are not pursuing truth, well, then you're essentially not pursuing God. And that's a massive discussion for another time, but just kind of think about that. I think that's it's not directly here in this dialogue, but that's going to be developed later. But the point is that there is this dual notion of condemnation here. So then in chapter 15, Justin is going to conclude the dialogue, and he is going to say, let's see here, and I despise the wicked and deceitful doctrine of Simon of my own nation, and if you give this book your authority, you will expose him before all, that if possible they may be converted. So again, there's this historical debate going on here. We don't have to dwell too much on that. For this end alone we compose this treatise, and our doctrines are not shameful according to a sober judgment, but are indeed more lofty than all human philosophy. And if not so, they are at least unlike the doctrines of these schools of thinkers, including the Epicureans and such other teachings of the poets, which all are allowed to acquaint themselves with both as acted and as written. And henceforth we shall be silent, having done as much as we could, and having added the prayer that all men everywhere may be counted worthy of the truth, and would that you also in a manner becoming piety and philosophy would for your own sakes judge justly. So that's quite a powerful ending to this text right here. And Justin is going to, again, mention this idea that he says, our doctrines are not shameful, but according to a sober judgment, i.e., when judged soberly, when judged with honesty, when they are not strawmanned, these doctrines are more lofty than all of human philosophy. And you only see a little bit of the idea why that's the case in this dialogue. And if you go to his dialogue, or not in this dialogue, but in this text, but if you go to his dialogue with Trypho, his fragments, and his first apology, you're going to start to see why Justin believes this more. We mentioned that one of the reasons why Justin believes this is because Christ is the embodiment of reason and revelation in a person itself, whereas Socrates and all the other philosophers were only able to access these truths of reason through their own seed of reason implanted in them. So Justin is going to really argue and think that the Christian tradition is the true tradition because of Christ himself, being that unbelievable figure, that this just insane idea, that just so radical, meaning going to the roots, this idea of reason and revelation being fused into one single person. That's going to be the basic idea with which we can start to understand Justin's view of Christian philosophy in the Christian tradition. So keep that in mind if you go on to read more of his texts. I will get to his first apology and maybe his dialogue with Trypho sometime in the future. I hope you enjoyed this short little walkthrough. Again, I didn't even come close to scratching the surface of all the content, but go for yourself and read it. Leave some questions and comments in the comments below. And please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you think. Let me know what Christian thinkers or secular thinkers or what videos you want me to make next. I'm happy to do any of that. Just give me some feedback, and thanks for watching.